Hi, everyone. This is 𝗪𝗲𝗄𝗧 Ruiz here. We are getting started with our LinkedIn Live for If My LinkedIn Post Could Talk. I'm very, 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 very excited. This is the first time that we are going live on LinkedIn with this very important mission for me personally. We started doing If My LinkedIn Post Could Talk now for 3 months. Every time in an audio room, and I've been super lucky to have everybody join in our little intimate community where we talk about how to post on LinkedIn, how to become a content creator, and where do we find the courage to put our voices out there, out in the world, to share the things that we care about. And now we're taking it a next step. Now we're here to go live with this experiment. And I am so excited that my friend, Dr. Cynthia Mathieu, accepted the challenge with me to come in live for the first time. So Cynthia, welcome.
Thank you. I'm so excited for this conversation.
Yeah, we already have a few people signing on the live stream on LinkedIn. We are going to, for those who have been on my audio events, we were going to follow a similar framework, but this time we're going to try to expand because the topic we have today it's dear and near to the heart of both Cynthia and I, which is how we found each other on LinkedIn, how we bonded over, but also how we are taking it a step forward to bring to you, perspectives and ideas that hopefully can also make it, a best approach for you if you are in a circumstance, in a work environment where this knowledge can be a tool for you to deal with that. But before we get started, Cynthia, we have a signature question for If My LinkedIn Post Could Talk, because initially, what we wanted to create here is a learning community. We want to make sure that those like you and I who started on LinkedIn from zero with no guidance, with no courage, right? Find our way into this platform so we can also share our messages and our voice with everybody. And I want to start with a signature question that I ask all my guests, so that people start getting to know you layer by layer. But now from a content creator point of view, you're very popular on LinkedIn, and I'm sure you're also juggling how to be present on LinkedIn, continue your line of thought, but also you're a professor, you're a researcher, you have a busy life. So I wonder if you have what I call the ABC methodology, which is something I totally made up. And let's see how you manage and how you balance your participation on LinkedIn with your professional and personal life as well. So my first question for you is, what is a thing that you leave for the last minute when you are to share content on LinkedIn?
Everything. Honestly, well, in order, usually my posts, I create an image with kind of a quote. So I'll have that prepared. And then in the morning, I just get up. I look at the ones that I've made in advance and I just write. So really everything, I just write right there, and it depends on what I feel like saying on that particular day, and then I'll taken from my research and some questions that people ask, or but I'm quite a last minute person when it comes to LinkedIn.
Well, last minute makes it for the best content, because there's no going back. Once you hit send,
Right.
it's there.
Exactly.
So what is a best practice that you've learned so far?
It's not, I don't think I'm an expert for sure. For me, it's always been about teaching. So that's really what I want to do. And so some of the things that I've learned, I always try to read. I actually not try to, I read all the comments. I try the subjects that I address. Well, you work on narcissism. Some of the subjects that I address are quite difficult, or dark, or I think it can strike a sensitive chord in a lot of what in what people are going through in the workplace. So I try to always incorporate something positive. Is something that I don't know if I've learned to do it on LinkedIn, but I've always been that way, even when I teach. But I try to incorporate it. So that is one thing. But I don't think there's just one way. I think that the content that I read, that I find most interesting, is always when people are being themselves and unique. That is what I like, uniqueness in content. So that's what I'm looking for, but that's also what I try to have people reflect on things. So that's how I write my posts.
And that really comes clear to me. And we're gonna dive into this more in detail, but one of the things I appreciate about you the most is, I think I've told you this, it's very impeccable in terms of the intention, the words. We don't have to know you personally for you to shine through what you put out there, and it's really fascinating and beautiful. So we'll get to that. And then a creativity booster. I'm sure there are days when you wake up and you have classes to give and homework to review and work and everything, and you're probably uninspired or probably, burned out, but you still want to continue on with sharing your message. What do you do to boost your creativity?
I read people's messages. Some people write to me privately to tell their stories. And they are the reason that I'm doing this. Otherwise, I would just continue writing in academic journal articles that nobody reads except for experts, right? But reading, I sometimes, when I'm tired, or I'm thinking, oh, does it really matter, or what I'll be writing about? Does it really make a difference? I'll just go back and reread some of the messages that people have sent me. So they not only matter, but they also help me generate ideas. That's how I get my ideas as well. I read every comment, and sometimes people agree, sometimes people disagree, but I use both. If someone disagrees, then I'll think, okay, maybe I need to explain this differently, or maybe I need to take what they're saying into consideration in my next posts. And it just really, I feel like I started something, but then people are just adding so much to it, and so much to the depth of the conversations that I'm able to get with the posts. That's invaluable. That is amazing. I learned so much. So I try to use it, and it helps me create content for sure.
In a way, it sounds like you're doing research in real time too. Like you're working with the data in the comments, right?
Great observation. I've never thought of it that way. That's
the academic in me, okay, which I don't show very often. You are the academic.
But you know what? Sometimes it takes someone who's outside of academia to make you look at it in a different way. But you're absolutely right, because I've never thought of it that way. We just had an aha moment right here. But I'm just, because we've, as academics, we're told that this is what research should be, right? You have to write, research grants and get, approval and this and that. But I've never been so inspired ever in my career than I've been right now and in the past months, because of all the experts I meet on LinkedIn, and the connections that I've made, and the collaborators that I've found, and just the comments. So absolutely, you're right. And actually, some of my future research projects are inspired by comments and experts and people who have been targeted in the workplace. So I include some of the behaviors that they say they've been a target of, and I include it in my future research for the projects that are coming. So it's just been an amazing. I would have never thought, but it's just been an amazing experience.
Yeah. Well, let's use this as a segue to, what I would really love for people to get to know about you. You've mentioned a couple of times, we kind of bonded over this topic of narcissism in the workplace. Definitely a situation that is a responsibility to talk about, to share what we know. I know, based on our conversations, we are coming from a similar place of purpose, which is, let's just spread the awareness. Let's just educate people with what we can, with what we know, with our experiences, with what we've researched. But you really have taken a solid step to use LinkedIn as that one-stop shop place for people to go and educate themselves with everything that you put out there. When I share your background in the invitation for this session, I included an example of all the work that, you have done on LinkedIn, but I highlighted 4 particular topics that you've touched on. So maybe we can use that as a springboard to continue diving into this topic with you. And I'm going to read it just to catch up anybody that hasn't had a chance to, research you yet. But I surfaced the post, for example, where you talk about how toxic leaders increase employee turnover in ways that no amount of well-being perks can compensate for. And I'm quoting you on that. I also, to quote you on another post where you talk about, or you pose the question really, why is it that when employees mention leaving a toxic workplace, many will see them as weak and cowards? I think this is a huge topic of victim blaming that is not being addressed appropriately today. So we can probably touch on that. You also had another post, which I think it's a little bit controversial in that, you know, you go very straightforward about the responsibility HR plays, or the role HR plays in enabling these type of cultures in managing. You know, you very much say if employees don't trust HR, who can they turn to when they face problems such as harassment, abuse, conflicts, or physical and mental health issues? And I know there's a debate out there whether or not HR is a conduit, right? So we can talk about that, and I'll definitely have a point of view there. And then there's another one that I wanted to highlight for the people who are, you know, following this session today. Leaders create organizational cultures and often use HR as a tool to implement it. When a culture is toxic, they are both to blame. So you're very elegant, but you're also very direct, and you're not going around the bushes with these topics. And I absolutely respect you for that. So let's go right in. What motivates you to write in this manner? What motivates you to be so direct and, you know, evidence based and candid, but still kind about what the issue really is?
I think I couldn't write any other way.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I've always been teaching. The way that you described my posts is the way that my students have been describing my teaching for years.
Mm-hmm.
So um, I write the way that I am. So I'm not using anything to write. I'm really just, actually, I don't even write on Word or something else. I in the morning I just open LinkedIn, go on the home screen, start a post, I add my little image, and I write directly. That's it, and then I send it. So that's how. Of course, that is the fruit of I reflect on things, I think about things, and I've been studying these topics for years within organizations. So I'm not just kind of making it up as I go, but I'm, that sometimes being inspired to send a message. So I think there's a way to address difficult topics without using aggressivity. And that's always been my way of doing things. But certainly, but I am known for for addressing things directly, but keeping it kind as well. So it's kind of a balance that you have to find, I think. And a lot of people have been writing when we in comments regarding leaders or toxic leaders, and a lot of people have been writing, it's about the intention.
Mm-hmm.
So I've always thought that if it comes, when you send a message, if it comes from a place where your intentions are positive, I'm not targeting anyone negatively. I want to help create better workplaces. So that's where I'm coming from. And I'm glad you're saying that it transpires, because some of the posts are can be controversial, I think. But I'm trying to shed a light onto topics that we're kind of walking around in workplaces, tiptoeing around these topics that we need to address. And I never go about it in a sense, in a way that I think that I have all the answers. I throw questions or statements sometimes. I talk about what research has found on these topics, what we found so far, where we're at so far. But the great thing about LinkedIn is you've got all these experts who actually are doing the work in workplaces. So you've got advocates, you've got experts, you've got HR experts, you've got coaches, you've got executives who are doing the work in workplace, and they're adding. So I start a conversation. I see my post as kind of a spark, and then people start talking, and a lot of them will offer solutions, will offer. So this for me is really motivating, but it's hard for me to say how I'm writing the way I write, because I don't try to have a style. I just write. Yeah.
And I think that's really amazing, because you have a book called Dark Personalities in the Workplace. You're really shedding light on the issue of what it is to deal with people with this kind of pathologies, right? And it can be a turnoff sometimes. I know I've experienced, it's taken me a while to get to the point where I feel like, okay, this is a normal topic. It can be a turnoff depending on how, like you said, how you address it, who you talk about it, who you talk it with, the audiences that you're putting it out for. What is about these topics, Cynthia? How do you land in studying dark personalities? What have you found that continues to ignite your interest in diving deeper and communicating what you know? And what do you think people need to know today that is probably even life-saving when it comes to dealing with this kind of phenomenon?
Lots of good questions. I'd say I did write a book. It's a bit on the academic side. That is why I've decided that I needed to get the message across on platforms where everyone has access to the information, right? And a lot of people can contribute. And again, I think I want to reach want to reach the people who matter to me, right? I've started studying individuals with dark personalities in workplaces for targets, for the targets. I wanted to shed a light on the fact that there are these individuals who enter workplaces who are not well intentioned, and I'm a very positive, I'd say, in my life. I'm a very positive person, but I've seen the damages. So what it ignited the flame, I would say at first, was that I was doing a postdoc and studying these individuals in prison settings. And then at the same time, I had a second job where I was working as a psychologist in an employees assistance program. And then I had these people coming in with burnout symptoms or anxiety, describing what they were going through. And when I was asking them to describe some of the bullying or harassment behavior, when they were describing the individual, I would just go tick, tick, tick. For me, that's when I thought, these are exactly the same traits I'm studying. Now, I know when I say that, a lot of people go, oh, wow, no, that's going a bit far, but it was. And then I started looking into, has anybody looked into some of these personalities? Specifically, I was working on psychopathy. But there was some stuff on a little bit on Machiavellianism, a little bit more on narcissism, not a lot on corporate psychopathy. So that's how it started, but it's always been for the people. And I think one of the things that I want people to understand is the goal has never been to start, putting a diagnosis on everyone around you. That's not it, because personality is on a continuum, right? So we all share traits, and we're all, rather higher or lower. But when you have a lot of, or constellation of these traits, and it becomes it becomes, I say, solidified, or when you have a lot of these traits where you might not be clinically identified as a narcissist, for example, but you have a lot of the traits for psychopathy. These individuals can be detrimental. But really, what I also want people to reflect on is that there's a positive bias for hiring them. So that's what the problem is. It's not just that they can be dangerous, it's that they are preferred candidates for leadership positions because of the way that we define leadership at the moment, right? So, and I know that you are, and I don't see a lot of change. Although people are getting educated, I don't see a lot of change in who we follow, who we admire, who we vote for, who we hire as leaders. There's definitely a certain profile there, and that I think we need to start reflecting upon as a society. And I think it's a global thing. I don't think it's just I'm from Canada. It's just from Canada or the U.S. I think it's something that's larger than that. But can I turn the table on you and ask you?
Sure.
What do you want to share at this time? I think it was it a couple of months ago when you shared your big post on your research. I think it was entitled "Narcissism Isn't Leadership," or I thought it was amazing. So I'm thinking, what made you want to share that at that moment?
I have the same experience as you. And just for those who are watching, at that time, Cynthia and I had not met each other as much. And I think we are in an inflection point right now where, I felt a sense of responsibility that I had information that I needed to put in the hands of other people for them to start their own research. I share the experience with you, Cynthia, that we are in a point in time when there's probably more awareness than it used to be 10 years ago when I started somewhat researching for my own survival. And it was still a closeted conversation. But there's not enough recognition of the issue, because the problem is that until it happens to you, the language is not there, the awareness is not there personally. And so the ability to empathize with those who are going through it, it's still a huge challenge. So that was the trigger for me. I felt like it was the time for putting information in the hands of others that had taken me a decade to collect, that I knew could open the eyes of those who were ready for it. The angle that I took was more, the title of my research is Narcissistic Abuse in the Workplace. I, like you, also came from the perspective of the victim and the target. I did not want to put the spotlight on the leaders and the narcissists anymore. That's, for me, is not as important as people being equipped to understand that this thing is ingrained in everything that we do, in every aspect of the cultures that we live in, and that we don't see it, is hidden in plain sight. And the first step to recognize that is to talk about it, is to put language around it. So I share that sentiment with you, and it's very palpable for me that it's a huge reality that we have to break into.
And I think one of the things is, in many work cultures, employees are made to feel as though they're the problem if they don't fit into a toxic culture. To me, it's kind of mind-blowing, right? Because if you start thinking about what type of personality would actually thrive and be comfortable in a toxic culture, then for me, and again, it's about thinking and viewing things and thinking outside the box and looking at the way things are going now. Employees have never suffered as much, and I think at first I thought it was mostly North America. So I was kind of, because my research the research that I conducted was in North America, but then through LinkedIn, I realized, oh, wow. So people in England, in Australia, in New Zealand, in Africa, and so many different countries have been sharing stories, and there are so many similarities in those stories. And again, employees feeling guilty and feeling ashamed and feeling like they're not enough, that they're not strong enough to be able to continue in these cultures. And it just breaks my heart, and it just wants me to do even more for people to understand that being comfortable in a toxic culture is a problem.
I mean, let's talk about that, because you talk a lot also about the institutional enablement. You probably don't call it that, but in your post you talk about the conduit, right, where this propagates, and that's something I'm very interested in, because I feel like this only happens because there are mechanisms for enablement, whether it is people, whether it is parts of the institution, whether it is the culture. Like we have the channels for this to continue to propagate. And with that, then there is the institutional betrayal on those who experience this issue, right? Those who are on the recipient side, when they try to advocate for themselves, when they try to do everything they've been taught, right? You have to report the bullying and you have to speak up. And then the reality hits when you do that and you're like, oh, this was really not a good idea. And now is my livelihood at stake. So talk to us about that. What is your perspective in terms of the role of HR? Maybe there are other parts of an organization people need to understand better from a structural standpoint that you see as conduits for this issue to continue to exist.
Yes. Well, one of the things that you said, that you mentioned, was that we put the system puts a lot of pressure on victims to deal with the problem. So we have all these great policies, following hashtag Me Too movements and other movements like Black Lives Matter. And so organizations have all created all these policies. But really, policies are as good as the effectiveness with which they're implemented. They can be perfect on paper, but I think it's my favorite saying is actions speak louder than words, right? For me, it's always been true. So really, a lot of times, the victim, we are putting pressure on the victim to deal with, well, it's up to you to bring about the problems so that we can know about it and we can actually act on it. Based on a lot of the stories that I've had in comments and people sharing it in private on LinkedIn, and of course experiencing within different types of organizations, unions, employees don't have a lot of power in changing a culture, and harassment can be part of the culture if it's been tolerated. If historically there are no consequences for perpetrating, bullying or harassment within the workplace, then it becomes part of the organizational culture. I've been asked, I've been saying before, if you want to change a culture, that you might consider toxic, you first have to ask yourself, why is it there in the first place? Who created it and who's enabling it and who's been benefiting from
benefiting?
There's some benefit. Humans don't, rarely do things if it doesn't benefit them. So who's in charge of the culture? I would say leaders at the top, upper management are responsible for the culture. Now, there's something that's systemic as well, right? So I'm not saying that every executive, benefits from a toxic culture. A lot of them suffer, from it, but it is still part of their responsibility to create a culture, the culture. So it comes from the top, right? And I've said that HR are also responsible. Well, I mean, that's how they define most of the time. If you look at how their mission statement, HR, is culture is part of it. They are the ones who usually write up all the value statements and do all the work on mission, vision, value. So they, in a sense, should be also responsible for making sure that the culture is a healthy and safe one for employees. However, that's not what we're seeing. And so what has, you were asking about motivation, and I think what really has gotten me going now and is fueling kind of all of my efforts more than ever before is all the stories that have been shared. I knew that there were problems, but not at that level. And I think that it just in me, it just kind of triggered the desire to get information from my research out there even more and continue to conduct studies that will help employees and organizations. But for now, and the question still remains, is who is HR working for? It's human resources. So a lot of people are going to say, well, they're not necessarily created for employees, but usually that it's part of what they should be doing is taking care of employees. But in a lot of organizations, HR tailors to executives and leaders. And that becomes a problem because then who do employees turn to? And when you want to lodge a formal complaint, you do with HR. Then if one of their, roles is to protect executives and managers, then what happens to the employee? And that's when problems start to arise, where there's pressure on. And again, I want to stress that I teach my students are studying HR, and they are so well intentioned. But again, like you're saying, they start working, and I warn them about it, but they start working in systems where it's not what they expected to do. So I think we need to rethink those systems, and we need to question them, and we need to make sure that there is an entity within the organization. I've worked with organizations that had office ombudsman for mental health offices, where it is an entity within the organization. It's separate from HR, separate from executives, and they had the latitude to help managers and employees as well. So there are solutions, and of course we need laws as well to protect targets. So there's a lot that has been done, but there's so much that still needs to be done, and I don't think that we've done enough in the past 15 years on workplace harassment or bullying. I don't even think that it has changed all that much. People are more aware, that's for sure. There are some laws that are out there, but there's still a lot of those behaviors going around, and a lot of people suffering from it.
Absolutely. This is a conversation we could have for 3-4 hours straight, Cynthia. There is always the debate, right? Like, there's like a hot potato, I feel like, with this issue, right? And that is, to me, the biggest pain point. The biggest pain point is, where does the accountability lie, and who is there to make sure we have systems of accountability that work, that are fair, that provide the right guidance, the right education? Because I think part of this issue is education too. I always share that, you know, these parts of the organization, HR, ethics and compliance, you know, like those parts that are supposed to keep the ethical framework of the organization, they're also a bit ignorant about this issue. And I don't mean ignorant in a, you know, disrespectful way. I mean in the genuine sense of the word. They're not equipped. They're not educated. They're not. They don't have the infrastructure to be able to embed something more definite into an organization that could actually be leveraged. And I see that also surfacing through, you know, diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives that also fall through the cracks, which tap immediately into this dysfunction, whether they're aware of it or not. So there's so many little, and the psychological safety initiatives, like all these initiatives are, you know, kind of worm openers in a way. And then once the can is open, then there's no infrastructure, right, to push through the actual dysfunction that's underneath it. That doesn't make it happen in the first place.
You're right. And there's also what I call the fake caring. Kind of the wellness, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Or there's a lot of let's say it becomes a marketing tool for a lot of organizations. But again, a lot of talk, not so much when it comes to action. And it's become a tool to attract employees, to try to retain employees. But then once people are in the organization, they can see if the organization is being truthful, if you know, there's integrity in what they are selling. We're hearing so much of the, oh, you know, mental health is so important. We take care of our employees. Our employees are our, you know, most important assets. Or we hear a lot of that. But then creating a safe workplace is not just about adding positive things. It's about dealing with the issues and having the courage of dealing with the problems, and to have the courage to go at the source. And that is something that we need to see more of, for sure.
Yeah. I was thinking too that, as you were explaining the facade, like that in itself is a sign, it's a symptom of corporate narcissism, right? Like that's what narcissistic systems do, and families do. The outside, everything's perfect, everything works beautiful, we have all these amazing programs, we have this beautiful family, but behind doors is where you see everything written on the wall. And I think, you know, I'm in different conversations now that the job market is in such a terrible way, and people are trying to identify, I don't want to go back to a toxic workplace like my last workplace. And people are trying to write down red flags. And, you know, I think that's one of them. Like, you know, if they have a nice facade, but there's no follow through, right? Like trying to investigate that ahead of time with asking the right questions can be a good way to detect whether or not you're entering another narcissistic organization, don't you think?
Right. It's always about the mask or the veneer or facade, like as you're saying, both for the individuals, but they're eventually, over time, the mask starts to crack, and that's when you see the actual person or culture come through, and people can sense it. It's not just about what they actually see, but they can sense it when it's not true. Same thing with with leaders, or also, you know, co-workers, for sure.
I'm getting some comments in the comment section about people who have. I'm showing them so others can follow through as well. You know, people where this conversation resonates, and people who have gone through recent experiences. And there's no one conversation that goes by every day at this point in time where I don't come across somebody who just went through it, who just had to walk away from it. I want to make sure, Cynthia, that before we have to wrap up here, we hear you validating these experiences, right? What would you say to somebody right now who is just going through or has just come out of something that destroyed their sense of self-worth? Because it comes down to that. We lose completely our sense of identity, our motivation, our drive, our wanting to take on the next job even. Like, you know, Leslie said in the comment, you know, our dream job is not a dream job in a toxic workplace. So what would you say? What do people need to hear right now, Cynthia, that you can tell them to not lose faith and to push through all this unfortunate phenomenon and take it on and move on to the next stage of their lives?
I'd say you're worth being in an environment where you're valued. And we should be looking at, you know, how there's been so much work done on relationships, finding the right life partner, and we're looking at what are the things that we want, and you know, in a partner. And I think we go about it almost in the same way for jobs. What am I looking for? But I always tell my students, make sure that you also have a second list. I think someone was talking about red flags. Make sure you also have a second list of what you will not compromise on. And you need that list before you enter that relationship, or before you enter that organization, that job, because we know that cognitively, once we're in something and we've invested in something, right, we're going to be thinking, but I've invested so much, I can't leave now. I'm about to get that promotion. I'm about to. It's the same thing when you know, gambling is the same thing. I've put so much money into that machine, it's going to pay eventually. It can't leave. So, you know, it just keeps you in sometimes very toxic relationships or situations. And so, but for both, I'd say relationships and work, we need that list, and we need to get back to that list. And I think the second thing is also listen to your body. A lot of people I've seen, and sometimes, and not just sometimes, many times, high functioning people are gonna, you know, come up with symptoms of burnout, and they're gonna say, I didn't see it coming. All right. But if we were more in tune with who we are, and if we were and don't be afraid to ask a lot of your workplace, because they're asking a lot of you. So it's okay to want to be in positive relationships. It's okay to want to be in good organizations, and it's also courageous to leave these situations. So you brushed on one of my posts. That is because I've received so many comments of people saying that they've been shamed, are labeled as weak. People saying you should have stayed there. You should have brought this person to justice, or you should have faced the bullying. I don't think that everyone is in a position to be able to do that physically, mentally. At certain, you know, stages in our lives, sometimes we just cannot be that person who holds the flag for everyone else, and that's okay too. So I think people who want to do that are courageous, but I also think that we should not or never shame people into leaving toxic relationships or toxic workplaces. And I think that's one thing that I want people to keep in mind.
That's amazing. I feel like we're gonna have to do a part 2 because there is really so much goodness out of just sitting down and talking about this out loud in the open, where, you know, people can come together and really dissect these topics. And, you know, I see questions coming through, and I'm trying to manage through that, being my first LinkedIn Live. So I will get better at this. But I think there's nothing. This is really what neutralizes, you know, that we can come together in conversation, that we can hear perspectives, that we can inform our frame of reference, and that we are courageous to come out with what we're thinking, what our experiences are. And I maybe we can do this again, Cynthia, and take it to the next step, because there's still so much to dive into. We're about to come to an end because I only committed, you know, so much time for you to be here, and I don't want to abuse that. But I will leave the floor to you. I would love for the audience to know maybe 3 things about Cynthia Mathieu, Dr. Cynthia Mathieu, that they cannot live today without knowing about you. So I will bring you on the floor and go ahead.
Oh, about me, that's not easy for me. I'd say that I encourage people not to be afraid to talk about the real issues. It might not be about me, but about my work. One of the things that I want people to know is, if you do identify someone in your workplace who might present a lot of the dark personality traits, I want you to know that you should never, ever deal with that coworker or that boss on your own. Make sure that you find mentors. Make sure that you find a good coach or resources. Do not stay on your own. It is too much for one person to go to suffer with. So I guess one thing you could know about me is I'm very passionate about teaching. Is the best part of my job, and I think I think my job is the best job in the world. I tell my students that all the time, not only because I get to teach, which is something that I absolutely love, and I think that's what motivates me to continue being on LinkedIn, but it's the human connections. It's always, for me, been the human connections and the connections that I'm able to make on LinkedIn that really motivate me to continue to write and be in touch and share my research. That's, I think, what I would want people to know about me.
Oh my God. Well, I'm gonna add one more thing as we close. I want people to know about you that your approach to talking about this topic is probably one of the most impeccable impeccable approaches I've come across with. There's a ton of people out there. Okay, they're published authors or you know, famous authors, and people going on TV and Instagram, and there's such a chaos out there about the topic of narcissism. How do you handle it? I really want people to know that following you, your work, your voice, your education is a gift. And I feel very lucky that we found each other in this journey. I feel very privileged to have the opportunity to have you here, that you took a chance on me, on this very small show that is just starting to be born, that we're both here as our first on LinkedIn. So now we have a story together, and that's super cool. And I cannot, you know, give you accolades enough for what you're doing and who you are, and what you're putting out there and on this platform for people to really think about how to manage situations and how to understand them, and be equipped to face them with courage and with knowledge. So thank you so much for all you do.
Wow. I have no words. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for having the courage to go live and and to connect with people. I really I love that I was the first to go live with you. So I love that, and I've always applauded courage like that. I don't have it, but you do, and it's been a privilege to meet you for the first time.
Awesome. Well, we are pending on a second part. I am so excited you all were here. If this inspired anything, at least is to see that, you know, we have ways to communicate our passions, our convictions, that it is okay, and that more than anything, it is super needed that we're out there pushing each other and supporting each other forward in the courage that it takes to build an online presence. So with that, I will see you all next time. Cynthia, again, thank you, and have a nice week. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.